For 3,000 years, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt ruled as gods on earth, carefully crafting a legacy of power and divinity in stone and gold. They told us who they were, but they lied. For centuries, their greatest secrets have been locked away, not in hidden chambers, but inside their very bones. Now, for the first time, we can read the story they never wanted told. Genetic evidence is exposing a truth of incest, disease, and complex origins that will rewrite what you thought you knew about Egypt's most powerful families. For thousands of years, the secrets of the pharaohs lay buried in their tombs, their bodies perfectly preserved, waiting. We marveled at their golden masks, their monumental pyramids, and the elaborate spells meant to grant them eternal life. We read their hieroglyphs, which told grand stories of their divine right to rule, their military victories, and their flawless bloodlines. But this was all carefully constructed propaganda, a narrative they controlled completely. The truth, as it turns out, was far messier and infinitely more human. The real story wasn't written in stone. It was encoded in their DNA. And now, we have the key. For over a century, archaeologists and historians pieced together the lives of the pharaohs from artifacts and texts. But these sources only tell us what the rulers wanted us to know. The most intimate truths, their health, their true parentage, their biological origins, remained a profound mystery. The key to unlocking these secrets has always been there, locked inside their mummified remains, their DNA. But accessing it has been one of the greatest challenges in modern science. There was a long-held belief that recovering usable DNA from Egyptian mummies was next to impossible. As Johannes Krauss, director at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, once noted, the potential preservation of DNA has to be regarded with skepticism. There were three big reasons for this. First, the Egyptian climate itself is a relentless enemy of organic material. The scorching daytime heat and high humidity in many tombs create the perfect conditions for DNA to degrade and break apart. DNA is a complex molecule, but it's also fragile. Over thousands of years, its long strands shatter into tiny, unreadable fragments, like a book that has crumbled into dust. Second, the very process of mummification, designed to preserve the body's form, was incredibly destructive to its genetic code. The use of natron salt to dry out the body, along with various resins and oils, chemically attacked the DNA, effectively scrambling the genetic information. It was like pouring acid on the pages of that already crumbling book. For decades, scientists believed this damage was irreversible. And finally, there was the problem of contamination. Over millennia, and especially after their tombs were opened, the mummies were exposed to the DNA of countless other organisms, bacteria, fungi, and most problematically, modern humans. Early attempts to analyze mummy DNA were often plagued by this issue, with researchers accidentally sequencing their own DNA instead of the pharaohs. This led to widespread doubt about whether any DNA extracted from mummies could truly be authentic. So, the problem was immense. The pharaohs' bodies were preserved, but their genetic stories were thought to be lost forever. We could look at their faces, but we couldn't read their biological truth. How could we ever know the reality of the boy king Tutankhamun's health, or the true ancestry of a powerful pharaoh like Ramesses III? The official record was silent, and science was, for a long time, blind. A new key was needed, a technological breakthrough that could piece together the fragments of this ancient genetic puzzle. The revolution came not from a single discovery, but with a torrent of technological advancements in a field called paleogenomics. The game truly changed with the invention of next-generation sequencing. If old methods were like trying to read a single page of a shredded book at a time, NGS is like a supercomputer that scans all the shredded pieces at once and uses complex algorithms to reassemble them. This technology allows scientists to work with the exact kind of DNA found in mummies: short, fragmented, and damaged. By sequencing millions of these tiny DNA fragments in parallel, researchers could finally reconstruct large portions of ancient genomes. Alongside this, new clean room protocols and authentication methods solved the contamination crisis. Scientists now work in sterile, full-body suits and use specific chemical signatures to distinguish ancient DNA from modern contaminants. Damaged DNA has a characteristic pattern of decay at its ends, a sort of chemical signature of its age. By looking for these signatures, researchers can be certain they are reading the Book of the Dead, not the genetic code of the living. The turning point came with a landmark 2017 study in the journal Nature Communications. An international team accomplished what was once thought impossible. They successfully extracted and analyzed DNA from 151 mummified individuals from a site at Abu Sir el Melek. They recovered mitochondrial genomes from 90 individuals and, most importantly, the first ever low-coverage genome-wide data from 3 ancient Egyptians. This study was the proof of concept the world was waiting for. It proved that despite the heat, humidity, and mummification, authentic ancient DNA could be recovered from Egyptian mummies. The door to the pharaohs' genetic secrets had been blown wide open. This breakthrough was followed by others, including a major 2020 study on the royal mummies of the 18th dynasty. Then, in July 2025, came the sequencing of the first complete genome from Egypt's Old Kingdom, the era when the pyramids were built. This 4,500-year-old genome belonged to a man who was not elaborately mummified and was buried in a higher status grave, a setting which ironically helped preserve his DNA better than some royal tombs. With these new tools and validated results, scientists could finally turn their attention to the most powerful figures of all, the royal families. They could now ask the questions that hieroglyphs could never answer and test the carefully crafted image of the pharaohs against the raw truth of their genes. No pharaoh captures the imagination quite like Tutankhamun, the boy king. His tomb, discovered intact by Howard Carter in 1922, revealed unimaginable treasures, but it was the secrets held within his body that would tell the real story. For decades, his sudden death around age 19 was a mystery, with theories ranging from murder to a chariot accident. The truth, revealed by his DNA, was far more tragic and began before he was even born. In 2010, a landmark study in the Journal of the American Medical Association used DNA testing and CT scans on Tutankhamun and other royal mummies. The results were shocking. For the first time, science confirmed Tutankhamun's precise parentage. His father was the pharaoh Akhenaten, and his mother was not one of Akhenaten's famous wives, but another mummy found in Tomb KV 35, known as the Younger Lady. DNA analysis proved this younger lady was Akhenaten's full sister. This means Tutankhamun was the direct offspring of a brother-sister union. While royal incest was practiced to maintain a pure bloodline, the genetic consequences were devastating. Generations of inbreeding in Tutankhamun's family created a genetic perfect storm. His DNA shows he was a frail and sickly king. He suffered from multiple inherited disorders, including a clubfoot and Kohler's disease, a rare and painful bone disorder that restricts blood supply to the bones in the feet. This explains why over 130 walking canes were found in his tomb. They weren't just symbols of power, they were mobility aids for a king who likely couldn't walk unaided. The divine image of a powerful pharaoh striding into battle was a lie. The reality was a young man in chronic pain, leaning heavily on a cane. His compromised immune system, another common result of severe inbreeding, left him vulnerable. DNA analysis found genetic material from the deadliest malaria parasite, Plasmodium falciparum, in his system. The final verdict on his death is now clear. He likely suffered a severe leg fracture, and in his already weakened inbred state, a subsequent bout of malaria proved fatal. He wasn't murdered. He was a victim of his family's obsession with a pure bloodline. The tragedy extends even further. Inside his tomb were two small, mummified fetuses, his stillborn daughters. DNA testing suggests they were his children with his wife, Ankhesenamun, who was also his half-sister. Their inability to produce a living heir was almost certainly another devastating consequence of generations of incest. The 18th dynasty, one of the most powerful in Egyptian history, ended not with a bang, but with the quiet, genetic collapse of its royal line. For centuries, the race, or origin, of the ancient Egyptians has been a subject of intense debate. Were they white, black, or something else entirely? Ancient art depicted people with a range of skin tones, and history has often been twisted to fit modern agendas. DNA, however, cuts through the noise and reveals a complex truth that defies simple categories. A fascinating piece of this puzzle involves one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, Ramesses III. A 2012 genetic study analyzed his mummy and reported he belonged to the Y-DNA haplogroup E1b1a. A haplogroup is like a major branch on the human family tree. The E1b1, a branch, is most frequently found today in sub-Saharan Africa. This initial finding was groundbreaking, suggesting a direct sub-Saharan ancestral line at the very top of Egyptian society. However, science is a process of refinement. Later geneticists have questioned this result, pointing out that the 2012 study used limited data and that the STR markers could have been misread. Many now argue that the royal lineages are more likely associated with haplogroup E1b1b, a different branch with ancient origins in Northeast Africa, which is common in modern Egyptians. This scientific debate itself shows just how complex the story is. Broader studies paint a clearer picture of the general population. The 2017 study of mummies from Abusir el-Melek found that, as a whole, ancient Egyptians were most closely related to ancient populations from the Near East, like the Levant and Anatolia. Interestingly, that same study found that modern Egyptians have more sub-Saharan African ancestry than these ancient individuals did, likely due to increased trade and movement along the Nile in the last 2,000 years. More recently, the first complete genome from the Old Kingdom showed that this 4,500-year-old man had ancestry that was roughly 80% from local North African populations and 20% from people linked to Mesopotamia. What this all points to is a population that was fundamentally indigenous to Northeast Africa, but was also a melting pot from its earliest days. The idea of a pure Egyptian race is a modern fiction. The pharaohs and their people were a blend of ancestries from North Africa, the Near East, and, as the ongoing debate around Ramesses III shows, had complex connections to the wider African continent. The tradition of royal incest didn't end with native Egyptian pharaohs. When Alexander the Great's general, Ptolemy I, established a new dynasty, his Macedonian Greek family adopted the custom with enthusiasm. They did it for the same reasons: to consolidate power, keep wealth in the family, and create an aura of divinity by emulating the gods, Osiris and Isis. The most famous member of this dynasty was Cleopatra VII. While we don't have her DNA, her family's history is a sordid tale of brother, sister, and uncle-niece marriages, interwoven with a shocking amount of political assassination. Cleopatra herself was married to two of her own younger brothers. But here's a paradox. Despite generations of intense inbreeding, the Ptolemies don't seem to have suffered from the same obvious physical defects that plagued Tutankhamun or other inbred royal lines like the Spanish Habsburgs. Historians note a lack of clear genetic disorders in historical accounts. However, the absence of physical deformity doesn't mean the dynasty was healthy. The true genetic decay may have been expressed in other ways. The dynasty was infamous for its instability, paranoia, and brutal internal power struggles. Siblings and parents regularly murdered one another for the throne. While this is often chalked up to pure political ambition, modern genetics suggests a chilling hypothesis. Could the intense inbreeding have contributed to psychological instability or personality disorders that fueled this constant, self-destructive conflict? We can't prove this without their DNA, but it's a fascinating idea. The genetic curse of incest may have manifested not just in sickly bodies, but in minds prone to the kind of paranoia and violence that ultimately tore the dynasty apart from the inside. Cleopatra's story is often seen as one of ambition and romance, but through a genetic lens, it could be the final, spectacular implosion of a family that had been poisoning its own gene pool for 300 years. For millennia, the pharaohs presented themselves as perfect, divine beings. Their monuments projected eternal strength, and their texts proclaimed the purity of their sacred bloodline. But their DNA tells a very different story. It's a story of human frailty hidden behind golden masks. We've learned that the obsession with purity through incest led not to strength, but to weakness, disease, and tragedy, as seen in the painful life of King Tutankhamun. We've discovered their origins were far more complex and diverse than they ever let on, with deep ancestral roots in Northeast Africa and connections to both the Near East and the wider African continent. And we've seen how this same tradition of inbreeding, continued for centuries, may have sowed the seeds of paranoia and destruction in Egypt's final dynasty. The science of paleogenomics has peeled back the layers of propaganda to reveal the vulnerable, human truth the pharaohs tried to hide. They were not flawless gods, but a ruling class grappling with the very real consequences of their own traditions. But this is just the beginning. As technology improves, we're unlocking more secrets from the sands of Egypt. The first Old Kingdom genome has pushed our understanding back to the age of the pyramid builders. And every new mummy that yields its genetic code adds another chapter to this incredible story. What other secrets are waiting to be discovered in the DNA of Egypt's kings and queens? The story is far from over. Subscribe now. The next secret is coming.